So I'm very honored to get the opportunity to introduce the speaker tonight, who I know is Emma. Emma and I were both in the school system for a long time, but when I really interacted with Emma was when I was the supervisor of social studies in Arlington Public Schools. Emma was on the school board and she was my best friend. She looked out for history. She introduced me to the Virginia Humanities, and it was through her leadership on the school board that we were able to bring in different perspectives for our teachers to teach them about the Latino population, the desegregation of schools, our Indigenous people. She was active in getting funding to push local history. So a lot of what we uncovered in the schools for our kids came from Emma being behind there pushing to get money. And so I am very appreciative of all that she did for me. And even today, she sat on the board of Virginia Humanities. And even today, Virginia Humanities are sponsors of our Memorializing the Enslaved project we're working on now. And so a lot of that genesis was her. She is a wealth. I'm not going to go into her story because you're going to hear it from her. I have done a lot of work with Emma in the past, and we are already working for something that's going to be upcoming together. So I'm really proud to introduce my friend, Emma.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm definitely honored to be here and to be invited by Kathy, who I admire also very much for her perseverance in working with teachers and enhancing an understanding of immigrants and in our schools, but now as a leader in the Arlington Historical Society. In this presentation, I am going to be sharing my Bolivian immigrant story, provide a historical perspective on educational programs in Arlington Public Schools, the growth of the immigrant community, the role of the federal and local government they played in helping immigrants, and historical barriers to higher education in Virginia. And I will end with the DREAM Project, which is my passion now. It's a nonprofit organization that I founded in 2011. So, as you can see, I am very proud to have in the audience one of my sisters, Maria Eugenia, and my son, James. As you know, we are family-oriented. We have a large family, but they are all over Virginia. So when I talk about what I have done, I think, in my life, and one of my legacies is actually the major theme of education and how investment in education transforms lives. And I'm happy also that we have a county board member here, Takis Karatonis, because he has really been a supportive of many of our immigrants, as well as our US-born second language speakers. So thank you. I was born in Cochabamba, Bolivia, and came to the US as a 16-year-old without my family to live with an American family in Fairfax County as a nanny. My parents were separated with 6 daughters. You see that photo is the last photo that we took, the 6 sisters, before we immigrated here. And as my parents were separated, and my mother had 6 daughters, ages 1 to 18. As is in the case of all immigrants, a relative, Aunt Mecha, lived in DC, and she was teaching Spanish at the Foreign Service Institute. She suggested to my mother that she could accommodate and help the 3 oldest daughters, Julia, 18, I was 16, and my sister's Susie, who was 15. She said, I can find American families that they can come and live with and go to school. As you can imagine, it was a very difficult decision for my mother to separate family members. but due to economic and political reasons, my mother could not support us financially, and my father, who was a political leader, was sent to exile in Peru. So my experience in immigrating reflects what many other immigrants face when the decision is made to why you have to immigrate. It is difficult and painful to leave your country, your family, your culture. For me, I was a senior in high school. I was going to be graduating from St. Andrew's School as #1 in my class. To leave my mother, my sisters, my friends in my last year of high school was not easy. So in August 1961, my younger sister Susie and I came to live in Lorton, Virginia, and attend Mount Vernon High School. At that time, the high schools in Virginia were segregated. And I guess because I was light-skinned, we were able to attend the white school. At that time, as a newcomer from Bolivia, I didn't understand the race separation, but it was very difficult. I didn't speak English well, and it was difficult to enroll in classes like English literature, American literature, US government, was all taught in English, and of course, I didn't understand half of it. It was frustrating, it was lonely, and that experience has pushed me to work with immigrants, especially or children of immigrants who have just arrived to our schools, who are lost, who, you know, their first experience in going to a high school can be terrifying. But in my case, I was fortunate. #1, in 1961, as you can recall, there was not major enforcement for immigration. I could go downtown and get my Social Security card, so I was able to work. And the Powelsons, the family I live with, they kept on saying, Emita, you have to go to college. But I couldn't even think how I would afford college. But they said, we'll help you with your college applications. Dr. Powelson helped me tutoring on Sunday, especially government classes. And he and his wife took me to visit colleges. And, you know, I visited Georgetown, I visited Trinity, I visited all these schools. I went to college night and learned about all these different colleges. But for me, it was just a dream. But I didn't give up. And one of the smartest things I did as a high school senior is to take the Spanish test in the college boards. And of course, I got an 800. It was the first 800 in Mount Vernon High School. So my counselors started looking at me in a different way, because somehow many times when you go to school and they are just focusing on your English, if you do not recognize the value and the role of the first language and the previous educational background that that student brings, you know, you can truly underestimate their potential. But the Powelsons did not give up on me. They wrote wonderful letters of recommendation. And on April 1962, I have still the letter of admissions from Radford College, which was at that time the women's division of VPI, because at that time, as many of you may recall, in Virginia, you had men, you know, universities like Virginia Tech or VMI or UVA, and then we had women colleges to prepare us to be teachers and nurses, right? So it was in college that I met my college sweetheart. You see me there with Al Giddings. He went to Virginia Tech. We both graduated in 1966, but I decided to go back home because I hadn't seen my sisters. My sister here, Maria Eugenia, at that time, was here. She was, I don't know, you were in elementary school, I think. But then when I came back, you were in high school. And it was just, I went, but then Al came to visit the family and asked for me to marry him. And we got married in 1967, July 1967, but he was in ROTC at Virginia Tech. And you know what happened, all of you historians, in 1967. November 1967, he gets his orders to go to Vietnam. We were recently married. We were stationed in Yuma Proving Grounds. So December 27, 1967, he leaves for Vietnam. Unfortunately, at that time, I did go back to Radford because the president offered me a fellowship so I could get my master's while Al was in Vietnam. And we made the decision that I would stay in Radford versus going to Bolivia, where his letters, I would never get his letters. Imagine, from Vietnam to Bolivia. So, unfortunately, August 22nd, 1968, as I was getting ready to see him 5 days before August 27th in Hawaii, I was informed that he died in Vietnam. It was not easy for a 22-year-old Bolivian student to decide what to do. Fortunately, his parents were very supportive, but I decided to finish my master's. But then it was 1968, and you all historians know how was 1968. All the Vietnam protests, Martin Luther King is killed, Robert Kennedy is killed, all the problems in the convention, the Democratic Party. I just could not see myself staying alone in the United States. So I decided to go back to Bolivia. And in Bolivia, I was able to work. But one of the greatest feelings that I have about Bolivia is that at that time, and even now, the education in Bolivia is not equitable. In the rural area, people do not have access many times to schools. At the time, in 1969, there were many rural communities that would not have a school because the Ministry of Education didn't provide a teacher. So 4 of us decided to fund an organization, Un Maestro Más, that was to provide teachers to the schools that didn't have, to a town or a small community, if they would build a school and if the community would participate in paying for the room and board of the rural teacher. And it was very successful. So we were able to raise funds and start 15 schools in Bolivia. It was one of those experiences that I will never forget. Then I come back, 1976. At that time in Bolivia, I was really reaching the glass ceiling because women in Bolivia, and especially anybody who would be a widow or would I couldn't live by myself, so I did live with my mother. But it was frustrating in the sense that I couldn't grow professionally. And so I decided, because I was a widow of the war, I could become a US citizen. And then I decided to come back to the United States and get my doctorate in education. And I think that was a very good decision I made, because then when I was 31, I came to Northern Virginia. I went to George Washington University, and I remarried. Unfortunately, I had my 2 children, James and Julie, and was hired in 1976 by Arlington Public Schools. Later, I will tell you more about that. And then in 2008, I get elected as the first Latina to the school board. And of course, I had the support of Walter Tejada, who was at the county board. He was the first Latino on the county board. And then after I retired in 2007, I dedicate my time to the DREAM project. So in Arlington Public Schools, when I came in 1976, remember what was happening. What happened in 1977? Refugees from Vietnam start arriving in Arlington. We have later Laotian refugees, Cambodian refugees. They start coming to our schools. Arlington Public Schools in 1976 was found out of compliance with the Office of Civil Rights for not providing bilingual education to children who were a certain number per class. And at that time, Larry Cuban, who was a very progressive superintendent, he got a funding from the federal government to start supporting programs in Arlington. And I was hired as the first Latina teacher, resource teacher at Key Elementary School and at Patrick Henry Elementary School. There was another Korean resource teacher that was supposed to be teaching at Fort Myer Elementary that closed, Abington Elementary. At that time, Burlington was a concentration of Koreans, but then when it became condominium, Koreans left Arlington for Fairfax. So then we realized that many of our policies and programs, there were 2 different roles that were playing. What is it that we did? On one hand, we had Supreme Court decisions that were very important in the provision of services to immigrants or children of immigrants or refugees, children who did not speak English as their native language, Lau versus Nichols. Then there was another major Supreme Court decision, Plyer versus Doe, that stated that any child, regardless of their immigration status, could attend the public schools. And that was a decision then that allowed all the immigrants or refugees that came, regardless of their status, to attend our schools. The Department of Education back in '76 played a very important role following the Lau decision, which was that schools, if they're going to receive federal funds, must provide services to students. And they had mandates, but at the same time, they had funding. They have funding for bilingual education, and these federal grants at that time, I was hired by a federal grant, the Bilingual Education Act, and then universities receive funding in order to prepare teachers. But we had other foreign policies and actions, as you can imagine, that influence. There are factors, that decisions that the US government makes that pushes immigrants and refugees to come to this country. Other decision, intervention in Central America. What happened then in the 80s and 90s? Children, families separate themselves. They come searching for security so that their, especially males, youngsters would not be in the army. And those, then Arlington starts experiencing new refugees, even though they did not have the right of a refugee. The Central Americans, even though they face conflict in their country, they do not have the rights and the support that somebody who is classified as a refugee. Because if you are classified as a refugee, you get funding for English instruction, for job training, and are eligible to work and get services. So for us, it was important that local funding from Arlington County be given so that we could have programs, teachers, because at one point, and here I just see one of my dear friends who is here from Wakefield High School, Rosalie Smith. Yeah, she's here, and she knows what happened. At one point back in 1980, when I was hired as a supervisor, we had 44 kids in a class. Glen Carlin had 60 kids with one teacher because we didn't have, in the public schools, we did not have what they call planning factors, that according certain number of students, you get a teacher. So we worked very hard to establish a program that would provide enough teachers for our students. And we had later the support of the school board and the county board. In the 80s and 90s, I became supervisor. When I was a supervisor, we had $500,000 in federal funds. That provided curriculum development, family engagement, teacher training. Amazing. We have right now, this book, this little book that you see is a product of teachers from our program who retired and said, we must tell the story of our children that came to Arlington Public Schools, if you ever want to learn more about it. So the population grew, and we had, then we started having 104 different languages in the schools. We had Spanish was, the predominant language, but then we had Arabic, Amharic, Bengali, Tigrinya, Urdu. We used to keep records of all the languages, all the countries, everything, but now Arlington doesn't keep that record as we used to be able to see what were the different trends. But I understand, thanks to Dulce Carrillo from Arlington Public Schools, that the largest country of origin for our students is Guatemala, right? So when we look at Arlington, I just found this fascinating dashboard of information, the race and ethnicity. If you ever want to really look at the data in Arlington County, what is it that you find? And this is something that dispels, false facts. Arlington County foreign population, those born in another country, 30% of Arlington. Okay? And when you look at this dashboard and you see that foreign born are not just Latino, Asians, or Blacks, they are white. So we have white, Hispanic, Latino, and I use the word Latino, I'll talk Asians, and multiracial. Now that we identify as multiracial, that's very good. And also Black, because they are from Africa. So you can see that our population, and if you look at the dashboard, I could have spent hours to look at and dispel all the misinformation that sometimes we have. For example, Arlington County Latino population is 15.5%. And one of the things people say are Latinos are leaving Arlington. Yes, many of them had to move because of housing, but Latinos are not leaving Arlington. The ones that want and can afford, they want to stay. They want to stay in Arlington. So our Latino population is half native born. So we have half of our Latinos in Arlington are US citizens. And only half are immigrants. In Arlington Public Schools, 31% of the population is Latinos. Of course, half of them are probably US born and, or probably more US born. And then, because what we know that the Latino population increase in the nation as well as here reflects the new children, the birth rate. I have my son, he's born in Arlington. He went to Arlington Public Schools. He has a child, my grandson, who I love very much, who was born in Arlington. So we are third generation. And 27.9% are limited English proficient in Arlington, and the per capita income of Latinos is $43,696, which is less, as you know, significantly less than the labor population. But one of the things, look at the labor force rate. When you look at Arlington County statistics, in Arlington, as a community, we are 78% the labor force rate. Latinos are 79.4. We are working, hard workers, established businesses, settled here. We had a good education, and it is reflected now in the second generation and in the third generation. So when we talk about immigrants, it is a very painful process when you make the decision, you leave your country. Somebody's mentioned that it is almost like when you get burned, your skin, is very raw, it hurts. But then when the skin gets better, then you feel better. The same is when you are an immigrant. You are new to the system. You have to struggle, learn the language. We have many immigrants that in their countries were professionals, did major, other jobs. They came to Arlington or they came to the United States, and maybe due to their immigration status or their difficulty sometimes accessing English instruction because it's costly and it takes time, you have to work, so they are underemployed. That is one of the characteristics, unfortunately, of many Latinos, that they tend to be underemployed. And so, but when we are new to the system, we see it wonderful. I'll never forget when I arrived to National Airport, we were driving to GW Parkway. And to this day, every time I go by GW Parkway and I turn to 95, I was, oh my gosh, oh, that is beautiful. Because in my country at that time, we didn't have those highways. And I come to Mount Vernon High School and I thought, oh my gosh, they have a swimming pool, they have this. I was in awe of all the things. And you go to a Safeway or, as a new immigrant that comes and goes to, to Costco, you think, oh my gosh, it's just, you're overwhelmed by all the different things that you find. And of course, you get also a shock because it depends on your previous experience with computers, that everything is electronic on the web, that you can't talk to somebody personally, that you have to register online in order to talk to someone at the job, in the job office of Arlington County, you have to register online in order to have help with a job. You know, when I was looking for jobs, I was walking down Adams Morgan looking for all the nonprofits. And the other thing is, in Arlington, many of our immigrant populations, we have nonprofits, but we don't have space. We don't have space to offer our services. We don't have access to that. Other counties, DC, they offer funding for populations so that they can get established. You know, I mean, Maryland is well known by Casa de Maryland and other programs that are just amazing. But we don't have that possibility. But what I have found with immigrants and refugees, that you don't know when the culture shock will come. The culture shock is the time that it could be when you realize, maybe after working so hard, that you can't feel that you belong here. And I have found with some of our, for example, we had one of our custodians in our schools. He had a major culture, mental health break after being here for 15 years. And he was from Cambodia, and he remembered the atrocities that happened. And so that trauma that he lived in Cambodia, it showed up. We had, when our Cambodian students came and their parents had been separated from their children, and their parents had, especially the mothers, were illiterate during the pot pole regime. And my experience was that one time I was called to Kenmore Middle School to provide an interpreter to a Cambodian mother who spoke Khmer, and the daughter had run away, and the police brought her to Kenmore to school, and the daughter didn't speak Khmer, and the mother didn't speak English. So that's why I have become such a strong advocate for continuing the role of learning in your first language. Because what happens is, as children grow older, they may be born here, but their native language stays as a 3-year-old. As a 3-year-old, because that's when they stop speaking more Spanish. It could have affecting cognitive growth. And what happens is they have difficulty reading. If somebody asks me, why do we continue to have the achievement gap between English language learners that are in middle school and are US born? I said, they stopped learning in their first language to start reading in a new language without speaking that language. It is very difficult. But anyway, so as I experience, as immigrants and students start in our schools, they start adjusting, and then they can integrate. But in order to have a full integration, sometimes you do have to learn the language, and you have to have more contact with other people from other countries. So that's why in Arlington, one of the things we did when I was the supervisor, I fostered family involvement. We got grants for family involvement. And I don't want to embarrass, but here in the audience is a parent who started getting engaged since her daughter was in kindergarten. And that's Gilda Vallejo. Stand up, Gilda. She started getting involved in her school with her Café de Madre Latina, miércoles. And then her daughter, Karen Vallejos, who is next to her, stand up, Karen, sorry. Karen, who graduated as valedictorian from Washington Liberty, and at that time was denied admission to universities in Virginia, is now the executive director of the DREAM Project, and she's a lawyer. Now she's a U.S. citizen. But here she's back in contributing. I have to say, the parents, and Gilda knows, that we worked together and we started the Dream Project because it was the parents who wanted the children to go to college. And so that's how, when we started, I was on the school board. And what happened? There was major, I don't know if you remember, immigrants, we were marching, and dreamers were marching. I use the word dreamers, by the way. I know some people called undocumented students. I don't mind saying student who is undocumented, but the reason why I still use the word dreamers is because it comes from the DREAM Act that failed in Congress by 6 votes in 2010. And Gilda, who's here, sorry for picking on you, and Karen was present at the Senate when it failed. And I remember Gilda said, we have to get together, and we ordered Chinese food, and the students came marching after having marched, and they held hands together, and they started with their support, and that's how we started the Dream Project. But then there was hope. June 2012, President Obama announces the executive order, and you have heard the word DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It gave our students who were here, before they were 16, the opportunity to have a social security number to work and not to be deported, which was a great relief for them, because it was a path for them to not just continue with their education, but to be able to work. However, Trump came, and you don't know how tough it was for our families. Many of us still had the trauma. We got together to hold hands and to say, and in the schools, I was on the school board. Teachers, students were afraid that ICE would be after them. A lot of guidance, the schools, what do we do if ICE comes to look for our students? And so many of us worked with the superintendent so that the students and the families, they could be safe. Yes, the Attorney General under Trump rescinded DACA. I was driving on Arlington Boulevard, September the 6th, when I heard that news. And I thought at that moment, all the students that had DACA. Now, fortunately, even though it was rescinded, the DACA holders, they could still have their authorization. But it is always a political football, and so much that several attorney general intervened, and fortunately in June 20, the Supreme Court blocks the rescission of DACA. But then, yes, it was September, no, it's not September, it's not 15, so it was yesterday, September 13. Texas U.S. District Court rules that DACA is unlawful. Now we have about 800,000 DACA recipients. Okay, many of our newcomers are not eligible for DACA, so they stop giving DACA. But we have 800,000 professionals working, contributing to this country. Now you tell me there's a ruling in Texas. Yes, it will probably go to the Supreme Court, but what does it tell you to a mechanical engineer? What does it tell to Natalie, who is right now at Stanford in medical school? What message does it send her when we hear this news? And so we all say Congress needs to act. We have to have a path to citizenship. Now, these dreamers' barriers in higher education, the worst came, and I have here a high school student from Washington. What's your school, Jenna?
Washington International School.
Washington International School, who said to me she was interested in work, well, in being an intern this summer. And I said, Jenna, please do research on all the barriers to higher education in Virginia. Now, I'm just focusing on immigrants because we know there were barriers for women, there were barriers for African Americans. One of the worst decisions of the Attorney General Kilgore in 2002, he sent not only a message to universities and colleges not to enroll undocumented immigrant students, and he mandated that post-secondary institutions inform ICE if they had in the rolls anybody who may be undocumented. Those barriers, I remember them. I work with the students. I have seen this. I have seen it time and time again. The community, we got involved and we did get Mexican American Legal Education Fund, and we sued universities in Virginia to admit our students. George Mason and Nova had they did say, we'll admit them, but paying out-of-state tuition. Okay, so our students were paying out-of-state tuition to attend college. Painful for our immigrant families. And the Dream Project, we did fund the organization, but we could only give $2,000 in scholarships. But then 2010, another Attorney General Cuccinelli again sent a memorandum to colleges and universities not to admit undocumented students. Again, we had access to Northern Virginia Community College, George Mason University, paying out of state. UVA at that time just put the applications aside. They didn't even consider. So our valedictorians from Arlington Public Schools, like Karen, like Natalie, like Henry Mejia, Henry was in his senior year at Yorktown High School. This happened. What was he going to do? Fortunately, he did go to Bucknell in Pennsylvania. Karen went to Texas. Natalie went to Texas. Hareth, who is also another of our founders who's here, went to Northern Virginia Community College. These are our heroes in Arlington. Hareth, stand up. Hareth was our first scholarship recipient in 2011. Now she has graduated from Trinity University and studied social work, but now she is working with a nonprofit. But anyway, so we got together the Dream Project, activists. Look at them. There's Karen Vallejos. There is Hareth Andrade. We were invited in 2014 by Delegate Lopez, talked to McAuliffe that we needed to participate in the parade when he was inaugurated. And it was raining. That's why we're like that. It was raining, but I felt I was being baptized, baptized in Virginia by saying, we can be welcome to Richmond, Virginia, we have all these highs and lows, I tell you. But we were there, and they are, and they are there. But then we fought after DACA. Unfortunately, at that time, again, Attorney General Mark Herring decides that DACA are eligible for in-state tuition. Another win. All our students. The fact that didn't have to pay out of state, but they were about 80% of our Dream Project scholars at that time were DACA, but that's not the case now. So we were all celebrating. Again, we celebrated when we have one positive decision. And then later came the final, after so many years of advocacy, where Governor Northam signs in-state tuition bill for tuition and then financial aid in 2022 here at Marymount University. Marymount is really one university that is very, very welcoming to our students. Now we have, sorry, this slide is up. I don't know how I can do it, but anyway, we have now the Dream Project has 100 Dream scholarships, 3,500. We have 20 countries of origin, and our students continue to excel in school. However, many of them who do not have a work permit, they struggle to get a professional job. Now, I believe that my presentation in honoring the immigrant experience, I wanted to shine light on dreamers who aspire to achieve and contribute to this country despite all barriers that they had to overcome to be in this country. Arlington is an amazing place to live and work, where we can and support each other. And we believe it's reciprocity. And in our Andean cultures, Quechua and Aymaras, we believe our number one commandment is Aini. Aini means reciprocity. Today, you help me, tomorrow I'll help you. And this dove that is a painting by Kirasol O'Neill, another one of our former dreamers. She's now a teacher in Arlington Public Schools, and our teacher. She did this drawing in her senior year when she felt that the dove represented the dreamers, the weight on not having citizenship, and the cup hands ready to catch the dove are the supporters of dreamers. So I thank you very much, and I'm open for questions.
Questions here first before we go to the online questions? Actually, I have one, and I'm gonna ask you to repeat it into the microphone for me. How can Arlington best show the history of people such as yourself and the people that you represent, the dreamers? How can, particularly the Arlington History, we've got 2 museums, we would like to do better. So how can we show your history?
Well, I think we need to partner. One of the things that I have found as a volunteer, as a nonprofit, is we need partnerships. And Kathy has always been, a partner, even though, for example, when we did an event on We Are All Arlington, then we did another event with, again, funding from, I guess, how did we get the funding? I don't even know. Yeah, well, basically, Arlington was celebrating 100 years, right, since it was and I was in the Arlington committee for celebrating the anniversary. I was the only Latina in the group, And the thing for me is, I have to tell you, is being the only Latina in the group, sometimes I cannot do it all, right, when you are in a committee. And so I remember Libby Garvey saying, Emma, for Hispanic Heritage Day, you should do an event for Latinos, honoring the history of Latinos in Arlington. And I remember at that time, my mother had just died. And I was completely depleted of my energy. And through that Zoom meeting, I said, I'm tired. I'm not going to do it alone. You have a budget, you have staff, you want to get your staff and the nonprofits working together, we'll do it. Fortunately, Diane from the libraries heard me and she called and says, okay, we can work with the library. And we had a wonderful encounter at en Reencuentro, we called it, at Arlington Library. And it was the first time that we heard that, yes, we needed to not just have some of our files of many nonprofits that were funded in Arlington that could collaborate. When I moved from my house to the apartment, and when my son was moving to the house, I gave a lot of things to the Arlington Library. But yes, we have to honor, it's not like we're newcomers here. We have been here for a long time, and we want to honor our history because, there's different events that have happened, and there's also, we need to work with you and other organizations, and we need funding too. I understand that the Arlington Historical Society needs funding too. So right now we have in the audience a county board member, and we have a representative of Arlington County Public Schools. You can go back and let them know. Because as a school board member, I remember when we were trying to, when I was on the school board and we were debating if we were going to name Stratford Building historical. Oh, there was so much discussion. There's no funding because if we do this, if we do that. And so we got together the community and we presented the students that integrated Arlington, and they saw it. And all the rest of the school board members supported that idea. There's a lot of things that we need to document, and but we need to work together. Public and private. Yes.
Emma, thank you for everything you do. I have a question for you because you work with AHS Immigrant Experience. I cannot imagine anything more cooler than the treatment that they gave our DACA students, where they have. Not only do they have to go through a culture shock, the acculturation process and everything, but on top of that, they see their future constantly under threat. So how does APS in its community deal with that? How do you prepare students to excel under these cruel conditions? I cannot imagine an 80-year-old, 70-year-old with this Damocles spade on top of their head, being able to even apply for college in both places, and yet they do and they succeed. How do you prepare students for it?
Well, the question was, how do we prepare students? He mentioned the word DACA, but I would say other students who may be undocumented to persevere against all odds. I'm summarizing your question. And be it at the school system or be it at the community level. Probably Hareth and Karen could answer that question better than I can, and they are in the audience. But it takes a community. It takes relationships. It takes support. When these students that are in our schools that are still their families, they are always in this uncertain status, but the families want their children to get educated. And so the children demonstrate and, they continue their studies because I don't know for all, but for me, the school was like my support system. It was my safe haven. And that teacher that provided the help And by the way, I am trying to tell you, Arlington Magazine, this issue has a wonderful article, Dreamers Among Us. It's an outstanding article about the stories of 4 of our students, how they persevere against all odds. Brian, who came by himself from El Salvador, he was a teacher who, he was homeless, who helped him. Then he came to Marymount, he got a scholarship, he continued, had the teacher provide home. He received Dream Project scholarships. Natalie Montaño, who was valedictorian from, at that time, Washington Liberty. She was hoping to get into Ivy League schools, which she didn't. The family was in despair. We sent her back to Bolivia, but then they said, then one of the board members in the Dream Project had a friend at Texas Tech who's the provost, and the provost looked at the record and Natalie, and they invited her to go, and they gave her a scholarship in Texas. And now Natalie perseveres. She's now at Stanford, studying in the medical school at Stanford. So these students are very smart, very able. They just need a little support. And they have to say, your immigration status is not you. You are who you are. Your immigration status is a temporary status. So we have to value them. Yes, in the schools we can do more because many times teachers or counselors may not know how to encourage the students to, complete college applications in the sense that when they have this barrier for their immigration status. But we have the Dream Project that provides mentoring for these students. We have mentors who help them to provide assistance one-to-one to get a scholarship, to apply, to investigate, to advocate. And unfortunately, for example, I'm not going to make you feel bad, Dulce. We have all these applicants now from Alexandria, Fairfax, Loudoun County. We have 2 from one high school that has 50% Latino, 2 applicants. And it's very hard for us. In Arlington, when we started, 100% of our Dream Scholars were Arlingtonians. Now, it's less than that because throughout Virginia, it's a very competitive application. And so it is an opportunity, and many of you community members that care about education, you know where to invest your dollars. Sorry, I'm a Dream Project chair of the board. Yes. Yes.
How do you feel that the massive amount of people coming from the border and going throughout the United States will affect the dreamer status, or do they get, and the numbers in classrooms for teachers?
Well, many of the students, I'll see if I can summarize. How do newcomers or new immigrants that are, many of them crossing the border and coming to this area, how is it that they can get help? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, I imagine class sizes get bigger.
Yes.
You need more translators.
Yes.
Do you have enough teachers? How does that affect your Dream Project?
Well, first of all, the first thing is that we have to understand that the students that come to this country and are living in whatever school jurisdiction, the school district, be it Maryland, be it, wherever, they have access to attend a public school. So every school should be providing instruction to that child. Some schools have major influxes. Arlington, not as much as we used to, because many of, for example, the buses that are coming now to Washington, D.C., and are housed in hotels and whatever, and it's a challenge. Many go to Maryland. In Maryland, we have a major growth, right? And we have here somebody who who works on the nonprofit La Casa de Maryland. And the growth of the immigrant population in Maryland has grown significantly, right? Yes. So the schools get challenged, but I have to tell you this, it's an investment. It's an investment for us to provide the best education for our children. It is an investment because one of the things, getting a high school diploma, being able to succeed in the United States, in their countries, you create a global citizen. It doesn't matter. Education, nobody takes education away from you. Is there any questions from Zoom?
Is there anything else from the Marty and the Zoom people?
There's no questions from the Zoom audience.
Okay, well, we'll come back to you. Anybody else in the audience? Okay, looks like we're all set.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you to all the Zoomers that came and wanted to learn, and our good friends. I see your names. I have my sister Susie there, the one who came with me back in 1961. Thank you for joining Zoom, and friends and teachers too. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll close out the Zoom session.